You've heard the stories about Hill House, the haunted mansion, the supernatural occurrences, the chilling tales passed down through time. But those stories are only half the picture. They miss the psychological depth, the intricate character studies, and the unsettling ambiguity that makes Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House such a masterclass in Gothic horror. This isn't your typical haunted house narrative. It's a deeply psychological exploration of trauma, fear, and the subjective nature of reality. In this series, we'll dissect each chapter, peeling back the layers of Jackson's masterful writing to reveal the complexities of her characters, the symbolic significance of the setting, and the unsettling questions the novel leaves unanswered. Forget the jump scares and simple ghost stories. This is a journey into the heart of the human mind, made all the more terrifying by the atmosphere Jackson so expertly creates. Let's start with the first chapter. Eleanor Vance was 32 years old when she came to Hill House. The only person in the world she genuinely hated now that her mother was dead was her sister. She disliked her brother-in-law and her 5-year-old niece, and she had no friends. This was owing largely to the 11 years she had spent caring for her invalid mother, which had left her with some proficiency as a nurse and an inability to face strong sunlight without blinking. She could not remember ever being truly happy. In her adult life, her years with her mother had been built up devotedly around small guilts and small reproaches, constant weariness and unending despair. Without ever wanting to become reserved and shy, she had spent so long alone, with no one to love, that it was difficult for her to talk, even casually, to another person without self-consciousness and an awkward inability to find words. Her name had turned up on Dr. Montague's list, because one day, when she was 12 years old, and her sister was 18 and their father had been dead for not quite a month, showers of stones had fallen on their house. Without any warning or any indication of purpose or reason, the stones dropped from the ceilings, rolled loudly down the walls, broke windows, and pattered maddeningly on the roof. The stones continued intermittently for 3 days, during which time Eleanor and her sister were less unnerved by the stones than by the neighbors and sightseers who gathered daily outside the front door, and by their mother's blind, hysterical insistence that all of this was due to malicious backbiting. People on the block who had had it in for her ever since she came. After 3 days, Eleanor and her sister were removed to the house of a friend, and the stones stopped falling, nor did they ever return, although Eleanor, her sister, and their mother went back to living in the house. The feud with the entire neighborhood, however, was never ended. The story had been forgotten by everyone except the people Dr. Montague consulted. It had certainly been forgotten by Eleanor and her sister, each of whom had supposed at the time that the other was responsible. During the whole underside of her life, ever since her first memory, Eleanor had been waiting for something like Hill House. Caring for her mother, lifting a cross, old lady from her chair to her bed, setting out endless little trays of soup and oatmeal, steeling herself to the filthy laundry. Eleanor had held fast to the belief that someday something would happen. She had accepted the invitation to Hill House by return mail, although her brother-in-law had insisted upon calling a couple of people to make sure that this doctor fellow was not aiming to introduce Eleanor to savage rites not unconnected with, and matters Eleanor's sister deemed it improper for an unmarried young woman to know. Perhaps Eleanor's sister whispered in the privacy of the marital bedroom, perhaps Dr. Montague, if that really was his name after all, used these women for some, well, experiments. You know, experiments. The way they do. Eleanor's sister dwelt richly upon experiments she had heard these doctors did. Eleanor had no such ideas, or having them, was not afraid. In short, Eleanor would have gone anywhere. Theodora, that was as much name as she used. Her sketches were signed Theo, and on her apartment door, the window of her shop, her telephone listing, her pale stationery, and the bottom of the lovely photograph of her on the mantel, the name was always only Theodora, was not at all like Eleanor. Duty and conscience were, for Theodora, attributes which belonged properly to Girl Scouts. Theodora's world was one of delight and soft colours. She had come on to Dr. Montague's list because, going laughing into the laboratory, bringing with her a rush of floral perfume, she had somehow been able, amused and excited over her own incredible skill, to identify correctly 18 cards out of 20, 15 cards out of 20, and 19 cards out of 20, held up by an assistant out of sight and hearing. The name of Theodora shone in the records of the laboratory, and so came inevitably to Dr. Montague's attention. Theodora had been entertained by Dr. Montague's first letter and answered it out of curiosity, perhaps the wakened knowledge in Theodora, which told her the names of symbols on cards held out of sight, urged her on her way toward Hill House. Yet she fully intended to decline the invitation. Yet, perhaps the stirring, urgent sense again, when Dr. Montague's confirming letter arrived, Theodora had been tempted and had somehow plunged blindly, wantonly, into a violent quarrel with the friend with whom she shared an apartment. Things were said on both sides which only time could eradicate. Theodora had deliberately and heartlessly smashed the lovely little figurine her friend had carved of her, and her friend had cruelly ripped to shreds the volume of Alfred de Musset, a birthday present from Theodora, taking particular pains with the page bearing Theodora's loving, teasing inscription. These acts were, of course, unforgettable. Before they could laugh over them together, time would have to go by. Theodora had written that night, accepting Dr. Montague's invitation, and departed in cold silence the next day. Luke Sanderson was a liar. He was also a thief. His aunt, the owner of Hill House, was fond of pointing out that her nephew had the best education, the best clothes, the best taste, and the worst companions of anyone she had ever known. She would have leaped at any chance to put him safely away for a few weeks. The family lawyer was prevailed upon to persuade Dr. Montague that the house could on no account be rented to him for his purposes without the confining presence of a family member during his stay. Perhaps at their first meeting, the doctor perceived in Luke a kind of strength or cat-like instinct for self-preservation, which made him almost as anxious as Mrs. Sanderson to have Luke with him in the house. At any rate, Luke was amused, his aunt grateful, and Dr. Montague more than satisfied. Mrs. Sanderson told the family lawyer that at any rate, there was really nothing in the house Luke could steal. The old silver there was of some value, she told the lawyer, but it represented an almost insuperable difficulty for Luke. It required energy to steal it and transform it into money. Mrs. Sanderson did Luke an injustice. Luke was not at all likely to make off with the family silver, Dr. Montague's watch, or Theodora's bracelet. His dishonesty was largely confined to taking petty cash from his aunt's pocketbook and cheating at cards. He was also apt to sell the watches and cigarette cases given to him, fondly and with pretty blushes, by his aunt's friends. Someday Luke would inherit Hill House, but he had never thought to find himself living in it. "I just don't think she should take the car is all," Eleanor's brother-in-law said, his tone firm. "It's half my car," Eleanor replied, equally stubborn. "I helped pay for it." "I just don't think she should take it is all," he repeated, as if saying it louder might make it true. He turned to his wife. "It isn't fair she gets to use it all summer, and we're stuck without it. Carrie drives it all the time anyway, and I barely even take it out of the garage," Eleanor argued. "Besides, you'll be up in the mountains the whole summer. You can't use it there. But what if poor little Linny gets sick or something? How are we supposed to get her to a doctor?" "I've thought about that, and you know you won't need it up there," Eleanor said firmly. Her brother-in-law wasn't letting go. "But what if Carrie gets sick? Or we need to go to the hospital?" Eleanor exhaled sharply. "It's half my car. I'm taking it." Carrie finally spoke, her voice calm but steely. "We don't even know where you're going, Eleanor. You haven't told us anything about this little trip of yours. I can't see myself just letting. You take my car." "It's half my car," Eleanor repeated, her voice rising. "No," Carrie said simply. "You may not." Her brother-in-law nodded in agreement. "We need it, like Carrie says." Carrie smiled, that superior little smile that made Eleanor's blood boil. "I'd never forgive myself if I let you take it and something happened. How do we even know we can trust this doctor of yours? You're still a young woman after all, and that car is worth a good deal of money. Carrie, now, I did call Homer in the credit office, her husband interjected hesitantly. He said this doctor fellow seems to be in good standing. Oh, of course, I'm sure he's a decent man. Carrie cut him off. But Eleanor doesn't even have the courtesy to tell us where she's going, or how to reach her if we need the car back. Something could happen, and we'd never know. She stirred her tea delicately, speaking now as if Eleanor weren't even in the room. Even if Eleanor wants to run off to the ends of the earth at the invitation of some strange man, that doesn't mean she should take my car with her. It's half my car, Eleanor snapped. Suppose poor little Linny got sick, her brother-in-law added again, as if this was the ultimate argument. Carrie's tone softened into the practiced, motherly one she reserved for lectures. I'm only doing what Mother would have thought best. She trusted me, Eleanor, and she'd never approve of me letting you run wild like this. I'm sure Mother would have agreed with me, Carrie continued, unperturbed. Eleanor's brother-in-law suddenly brightened with a new idea. And how do we know she'll bring it back in good condition? There has to be a first time for everything, Eleanor thought. The scene transitions to Eleanor sneaking off with the car. She stepped out of the taxi in the dim, early morning, her heart racing. By now, maybe her sister and brother-in-law were stirring in bed, the first flicker of suspicion dawning on them. Her suitcase felt heavier than it was as she pulled it. Out of the taxi, her hands trembling. Are they following me? She muttered to herself, glancing down the street. Did they figure it out? She turned toward the massive city garage where their car was kept, dragging her suitcase and trying to stay calm. But in her nervous haste, she crashed directly into a tiny, elderly woman carrying a tower of packages. "Oh no!" Eleanor exclaimed as the woman's bag tumbled to the ground, spilling cheesecake, tomato slices, and a hard roll onto the sidewalk. "Damn you! Damn you!" the old woman shrieked, her face inches from Eleanor's. "I was taking that home for my lunch." "I'm so sorry." Eleanor bent down, desperate to scoop up the mess, but the food was ruined, and the little lady snatched up her other packages before Eleanor could even touch them. "I'm really sorry," Eleanor said again, her voice shaking. "Damn you," the woman repeated, quieter this time, but no less furious. "That was going to be my little lunch, and now, thanks to you, please," Eleanor pleaded, fumbling for her pocketbook. "Let me pay for it." The little lady hesitated, her expression softening slightly. "I couldn't just take money," she said. "It's not like I bought it myself. They were leftovers. Oh, you should have seen the ham they had. But someone else got that. Can I buy you something to replace it? I'm in a terrible hurry, but..." The little lady hugged one of her remaining packages tightly and interrupted. "You can pay for my taxi fare home," she declared, grinning slyly. "Then no one else will knock me down." "Gladly," Eleanor said, rushing to hand some cash to the waiting taxi driver. The old lady climbed into the taxi with Eleanor's help, settling in with her packages. "All right, sweetheart," the driver asked. "Where to?" "I'll tell you after we start," she replied, then turned back to Eleanor. "Good luck, dearie. Watch how you go knocking people down from now on." "Goodbye," Eleanor said, still shaken. "I'll be praying for you," the old lady called out as the taxi pulled away. Eleanor watched the taxi disappear and sighed. "Well," she muttered to herself, "at least there's one person who'll be praying for me." It was the first genuinely shining day of summer, a time of year that always brought Eleanor aching memories of her early childhood, when it had seemed summer all the time. She couldn't remember a winter before her father's death on a cold, wet day. Lately, during these swift-counted years, she'd wondered what had become of all those wasted summer days. How could she have spent them so wantonly? "I'm foolish," she told herself each summer. "Very foolish. I'm grown up now and know the value of things. Nothing is ever really wasted," she believed sensibly, not even one's childhood. And yet, each year, one summer morning, the warm wind would come down the city street, and she'd be touched by the cold thought, I've let more time slip away. This morning, driving the little car she and her sister owned, apprehensive lest they realized she'd taken it, she followed the lines of traffic, stopping and turning as needed. Smiling at the sunlight slanting down the street, she thought, I'm finally taking a step. Before, when driving with her sister's permission, she'd been cautious, avoiding even the slightest scratch. But today, with her carton, suitcase, gloves, pocketbook, and coat beside her, the car belonged entirely to her, a little contained world. I'm really going, she thought. At the last traffic light, before turning onto the highway, she stopped, waiting, and slid Dr. Montague's letter from her pocketbook. I won't even need a map, she thought. He must be a very careful man. The letter read, Route 39 to Ashton, then turn left onto Route 5 going west. Follow this for a little less than 30 miles, and you'll come to the small village of Hillsdale. Go through Hillsdale to the corner with a gas station on the left and a church on the right, and turn left onto what seems to be a narrow country road. You'll be going up into the hills and the road is very poor. Follow this road to the end, about 6 miles, and you'll come to the gates of Hill House. I'm making these directions so detailed because it's inadvisable to stop in Hillsdale to ask your way. The people there are rude to strangers and openly hostile to anyone inquiring about Hill House. I am very happy that you will be joining us in Hill House and will take great pleasure in making your acquaintance on Thursday the 21st of June. The light changed. She turned onto the highway, free of the city. No one can catch me now. They don't even know which way I'm going, she thought. She'd never driven far alone before. Dividing her journey into miles and hours seemed silly. She saw it as a passage of moments, each new carrying her along a path of incredible novelty to a new place. The journey itself was her positive action. Her destination was vague, unimagined, perhaps non-existent. She meant to savor every turn, loving the road, the trees, the houses, the small, ugly towns, teasing herself with the notion of stopping anywhere and never leaving. She might pull over, though that wasn't allowed, she reminded herself, and leave the car while she wandered into the welcoming country. She might wander until exhausted, chasing butterflies or following a stream, then come at nightfall to a woodcutter's hut. She might make her home in East Barrington, Desmond, or Burke. She might never leave the road at all until the wheels wore out and she reached the world's end. And she thought, I might just go to Hill House, where I'm expected, where I'm being given shelter, room, board, and a small salary in consideration of forsaking my commitments in the city and running away to see the world. I wonder what Dr. Montague is like. I wonder what Hill House is like. I wonder who else will be there. She was well away from the city now, watching for the turn onto Route 39, the magic thread Dr. Montague had chosen to bring her safely to him and Hill House. No other road could lead her where she wanted to be. Dr. Montague was confirmed, infallible. Under the sign for Route 39 was another. Ashton, 121 miles. The road, her intimate friend, turned and dipped, revealing surprises. A cow, an incurious dog. Down into hollows where small towns lay past fields and orchards. On one village's main street, she passed a vast pillared house with shutters and stone lions, and thought she might live there, dusting the lions each morning and patting their heads good night. Time is beginning this morning in June, she assured herself, but it's a strangely new time. In these few seconds, I've lived a lifetime in a house with 2 lions. Every morning I swept the porch and dusted the lions, and every evening I patted their heads goodnight. And once a week I washed their faces and manes and paws with warm water and soda, and cleaned between their teeth with a swab. Inside their house, the rooms were tall and clear with shining floors and polished windows. A little dainty old lady took care of me, moving starchily with a silver tea service on a tray, and bringing me a glass of elderberry wine each evening for my health's sake. I took my dinner alone in the long, quiet dining room at the gleaming table, and between the tall windows the white paneling of the walls shone in the candlelight. I dined upon a bird and radishes from the garden and homemade plum jam. When I slept, it was under a canopy of white organdy, and a nightlight guarded me from the hall. People bowed to me on the streets of the town because everyone was very proud of my lions. When I died, she'd left the town behind, passing dirty, closed lunch stands and torn signs. There had been a fair here once, long ago, with motorcycle races. The sign still carried fragments: dare, evil. She laughed, perceiving how she sought omens everywhere. The word is daredevil, Eleanor. Daredevil drivers. And she slowed, driving too fast. She might reach Hill House too soon. At one spot, she stopped to stare in disbelief and wonder. For about a quarter of a mile, she'd been admiring a row of splendid oleanders, blooming pink and white. Now she came to the gateway they protected, and past it, the trees continued. The gateway was ruined stone pillars, with a road leading into empty fields. She could see the oleanders ran up each side of a great square, to a line of trees by a little river. Inside the square, there was nothing. No house, no building. What was here and is gone, or what was going to be here and never came, she wondered. Was it a house, garden, orchard? Were they driven away forever, or are they coming back? Oleanders are poisonous, she remembered. Could they be guarding something? Will I get out of my car and go between the ruined gates and find myself in a fairyland, protected poisonously from passing eyes? Once I've stepped between the gateposts, will the spell be broken? I will go into a sweet garden with fountains and low benches and roses trained over arbors, and find one path, jeweled perhaps with rubies and emeralds, soft enough for a king's daughter to walk upon with her little sandaled feet, and it will lead me directly to the palace which lies under a spell. I will walk up low stone steps past stone lions guarding and into a courtyard where a fountain plays, and the queen waits, weeping, for the princess to return. She will drop her embroidery when she sees me and cry out to the palace servants, stirring at last after their long sleep, to prepare a great feast, because the enchantment is ended and the palace is itself again, and we shall live happily ever after. No, of course, she thought, starting her car again. Once the palace becomes visible and the spell is broken, the whole spell will be broken, and all this countryside outside the oleanders will return to its proper form, fading away, towns and signs and cows, into a soft green picture from a fairy tale. Then, coming down from the hills, there will be a prince riding, bright in green and silver, with 100 bowmen riding behind him, pennants stirring, horses tossing, jewels flashing. She laughed and smiled goodbye at the magic oleanders. Another day, she told them. Another day I'll come back and break your spell. She stopped for lunch after driving 101 miles. She found a country restaurant, an old mill, and found herself seated on a balcony overlooking a dashing stream, looking down at wet rocks and sparkling water. A cut glass bowl of cottage cheese and corn sticks sat on the table before her. Because this was a land where enchantments were swiftly made and broken, she lingered over lunch, knowing Hill House waited. The only other diners were a family, a mother, father, small, boy and girl. They spoke softly. The little girl regarded Eleanor with frank curiosity, then smiled. Light from the stream touched the ceiling, tables, and the girl's curls. Her mother said, "She wants her cup of stars." Eleanor looked up, surprised. The girl was refusing her milk. Her father frowned, her brother giggled, and her mother calmly repeated, "She wants her cup of stars." Indeed, Eleanor thought, so do I. A cup of stars, of course. Her little cup, the mother explained to the thunderstruck waitress. It has stars in the bottom, and she always drinks her milk from it at home. She calls it her cup of stars because she can see the stars while she drinks. The waitress nodded, unconvinced. The mother said to the girl, "You'll have your milk from your cup of stars tonight, but just for now, will you take a little milk from this glass?" Don't do it, Eleanor thought. Insist on your cup of stars. Once they trap you into being like everyone else, You'll never see it again." The little girl glanced at Eleanor, smiled, a subtle, comprehending smile, and stubbornly shook her head. Brave girl, Eleanor thought. Wise, brave girl. "You're spoiling her," the father said. "She shouldn't be allowed these whims." "Just this once," the mother said, touching the girl's hand. "Eat your ice cream," she said. When they left, the little girl waved. Eleanor waved back, finishing her coffee in joyful loneliness, the stream tumbling below. "I haven't far to go," she thought. "I'm more than halfway there." "Journey's end," she mused, and a tune danced in her mind, bringing a phrase. "In delay there lies no plenty," she thought. She almost stopped just outside Ashton, at a tiny cottage buried in a garden. "I could live here alone," she thought, slowing the car to look down the winding path to the blue door with a white cat on the step. No one would ever find me here, behind all those roses. And I'd plant oleanders by the road. I will light a fire in the cool evenings and toast apples at my own hearth. I will raise white cats and sew white curtains for the windows, and sometimes come out of my door to go to the store to buy cinnamon and tea and thread. People will come to me to have their fortunes told, and I will brew love potions for sad maidens. I will have a robin." But the cottage was behind her. It was time to find her new road, carefully charted by Dr. Montague. "Turn left onto Route 5 going west," his letter said. And as efficiently as if he were guiding her, she turned. She was on Route 5, her journey nearly done. Despite his warning, she thought, "I'll stop in Hillsdale for a minute, just for coffee. I can't bear to have my long trip end so soon." It wasn't really disobeying. The letter said it was inadvisable to ask directions, not forbidden to stop for coffee. And perhaps, if she didn't mention Hill House, she wouldn't be doing wrong. Anyway, she thought, it's my last chance. Hillsdale appeared suddenly, a tangled mess of dirty houses and crooked streets. It was small. She could see the corner with the gas station and church. Only one place for coffee, an unattractive diner. Eleanor stopped, locked her car, mindful of her suitcase and carton, and got out. "I won't spend long in Hillsdale," she thought, looking at the dark, ugly street. A dog slept against a wall. A woman stood in a doorway and two boys lounged against a fence, elaborately silent. Eleanor, afraid of dogs, women, and hoodlums, quickly entered the diner, clutching her pocketbook and keys. Inside, a chinless, tired girl stood behind the counter. A man sat eating. How hungry must he be to come here, she wondered, looking at the grey counter and smeared glass bowl of donuts. "Coffee," she said. The girl wearily tossed down a cup. "I'll drink this coffee because I said I would," Eleanor told herself. "But next time, I'll listen to Dr. Montague." A joke passed between the man and the girl. When she set down Eleanor's coffee, she half smiled at him. He shrugged, and she laughed. Eleanor looked up, but the girl was examining her nails, the man wiping his plate. "Perhaps my coffee is poisoned. It certainly looks it." Determined to plumb Hillsdale to its depths, Eleanor said, "I'll have one of those donuts too." And the girl, glancing at the man, slid one onto a dish, laughing again at his look. "This is a pretty little town," Eleanor said. "What is it called?" The girl stared. Perhaps no one had ever called Hillsdale pretty. After a moment, she looked at the man, then said, "Hillsdale. Have you lived here long?" Eleanor asked. "I'm not going to mention Hill House," she thought. "I just want to waste a little time." "Yeah," the girl said. "It must be pleasant living in a small town. I come from the city." "Yeah? Do you like it here?" "It's all right," the girl said. She looked at the man, who was listening. Not much to do. "How large is it?" "Pretty small. You want more coffee?" This was for the man who rattled his cup. Eleanor took a shuddering sip and wondered how he could want more. "Do you have a lot of visitors? Tourists?" she asked after the girl refilled the man's cup. "What for?" The girl flashed at her from an emptiness Eleanor had never known. "Why would anybody come here?" She looked sullenly at the man. "There's not even a movie." But the hills are so pretty. In small towns, like this, you'll find city people who've built homes in the hills. For privacy, the girl laughed shortly. Not here, they don't. Or remodeling old houses. Privacy, the girl said, laughing again. It just seems surprising, Eleanor said, feeling the man looking at her. Yeah, the girl said. If they'd put in a movie even. I thought, Eleanor said carefully, that I might even look around. Old houses are usually cheap, and it's fun to make them over. Not around here, the girl said. Then there are no old houses around here, back in the hills. Nope. The man rose, taking change. People leave this town, he said. They don't come here. When the door closed, the girl turned resentfully to Eleanor. He was right, she said. They go away, the lucky ones. Why don't you run away? Eleanor asked. The girl shrugged. Would I be any better off? She took Eleanor's money and returned the change. Then, with a quick flash, she glanced at the empty plates. He comes in every day, she said. When Eleanor smiled and started to speak, the girl turned her back. Eleanor, feeling dismissed, Rose took her keys and pocketbook. Goodbye, she said. The girl, back turned, said, Good luck to you. I hope you find your house. The road was deeply rutted and rocky. Eleanor's little car stumbled and bounced, reluctant to go farther into the unattractive hills, where the day was drawing to a close under thick trees. They don't seem to get much traffic on this road, she thought wryly, avoiding a rock. 6 miles of this won't do the car any good, and for the first time in hours she thought of her sister and laughed. By now they'd surely know she'd taken the car, but not where. They'd be telling each other incredulously that they'd never have suspected Eleanor. I'd never have suspected myself, she thought, laughing. Everything is different. I am a new person, far from home. In delay there lies no plenty. Present mirth hath present laughter. She began to recite, then gasped as the car hit a rock, scraped ominously, but valiantly resumed its climb. Tree branches brushed the windshield. It grew darker. Hill House likes to make an entrance, she thought. I wonder if the sun ever shines here. Finally, the car cleared a tangle of branches and came into a clearing by Hill House's gate. Why am I here, she wondered. The gate was tall, ominous, heavy, set into a stone wall disappearing into the trees. Even from the car, she could see the padlock and chain. Beyond, the road continued, shadowed by dark trees. Since the gate was locked and double locked and chained and barred. She didn't try to get out, but pressed the horn. The trees and gate shuddered slightly. After a minute, she blew the horn again and saw a man coming from inside. He was dark and unwelcoming, scowling through the bars before approaching. What you want? His voice was sharp, mean. I want to come in. Please unlock the gate. Who say? Why? She faltered. I'm supposed to come in, she said. What for? I am expected. Or am I? She wondered. Is this as far as I go? Who by? She knew he was enjoying his authority. Once he unlocked the gate, he'd lose his temporary superiority. And what superiority do I have? I'm outside the gate. She knew losing her temper would only make him refuse. She could anticipate his later protestations of innocence. The vacant grin, blank eyes, whining voice, protesting he would have let her in, planned to. But how could he be sure? He had his orders, didn't he? He'd be the one in trouble, wouldn't he, if he let in someone who wasn't supposed to be there? She could see his shrug and, picturing him, laughed. Perhaps the worst thing she could have done. He moved back from the gate. You better come back later, he said, turning his back. Listen, she called, trying not to sound angry. I am one of Dr. Montague's guests. He will be expecting me. Please listen. He turned and grinned. They couldn't rightly be expecting you, he said, seeing as you're the only one come so far. Do you mean there's no one in the house? No one I know of. Maybe my wife, getting it fixed up. So they couldn't be expecting you now, could they? She sat back, closed her eyes. Hill House, she thought. You're as hard to get into as heaven. I suppose you know what you're asking for coming here. I suppose they told you back in the city. You hear anything about this place? I heard I was invited as a guest of Dr. Montague's. When you open the gate, I will go inside. I'll open them. I just want to be sure you know what's waiting for you. You ever been here before? One of the family, maybe? He peered through the bars. I can't let you in till I'm sure, can I? What did you say your name was? She sighed. Eleanor Vance. Not one of the family then. You ever hear anything about this place? It's my chance, she thought. I could turn around and go away, and no one would blame me. Anyone has a right to run away. She put her head out the window and said with fury, My name is Eleanor Vance. I am expected in Hill House. Unlock those gates at once. All right, all right. Deliberately, he opened the padlock, loosened the chain, and swung the gates. Open. Eleanor moved the car slowly. His alacrity in leaping aside made her think he'd perceived her fleeting impulse to leave. She laughed, then stopped the car because he was approaching, safely, from the side. You won't like it, he said. You'll be sorry I ever opened that gate. Out of the way, please. You've held me up long enough. You think they could get anyone else to open this gate? You think anyone else would stay around here that long, except me and my wife? You think we can't have things just about the way we want them, long as we stay around here and fix up the house, and open the gates for all you city people who think you know everything? Please get away from my car. She dared not admit he frightened her. His nearness, leaning against the car, was ugly, his resentment puzzling. She'd made him open the gate, but did he think of the house and gardens as his own? A name from Dr. Montague's letter came to mind, and she asked, Are you Dudley, the caretaker? Yes, I'm Dudley, the caretaker. He mimicked her. Who else you think would be around here? The honest old family retainer, she thought. Proud and loyal and thoroughly unpleasant. You and your wife take care of the house alone? Who else? She moved restlessly, afraid to draw away too obviously, yet wanting to make him stand aside. I'm sure you'll be able to make us very comfortable, she said, putting finality into her voice. Meanwhile, I'm anxious to get to the house. He snickered. Me now, he said. Me, I don't hang around here after dark. Grinning, he stood away, and Eleanor was grateful, though awkward starting the car under his eye. He'll keep popping out at me, she thought, a sneering Cheshire cat. To show she wasn't affected, she began to whistle, annoyed that the same tune ran through her head. Present mirth hath present laughter. She told herself to think of something else. The rest of the words were probably unsuitable and disreputable. Over the trees, she caught glimpses of Hill House's roofs, perhaps a tower. They made houses so oddly back then, she thought. Towers, turrets, buttresses, wooden lace, Gothic spires and gargoyles, nothing undecorated. Perhaps Hill House has a tower, a secret chamber, or a passage used by smugglers, though what could they smuggle around these hills? Perhaps I will encounter a devilishly handsome smuggler and... She turned onto the last stretch of drive, directly to Hill House, and without thought pressed the brake, staring. The house was vile. She shivered. Hill House is vile. It is diseased. Get away from here at once. The first chapter is closed, but Hill House remains ominously open, its secret still shrouded in shadow. We've only just begun to uncover the chilling mysteries within its decaying walls, the palpable sense of foreboding already thick in the air. The seeds of dread have been sown, but the true horror, the terrifying revelations and escalating events are yet to unfold. In our next video, we'll delve deeper into Chapter 2, where the ordinary twists into the extraordinary, and the line between sanity and madness blurs irrevocably. Prepare yourself for a terrifying descent into the heart of the haunting, as the house itself begins to exert its influence on those within its grasp. Something is watching. Something is waiting. Subscribe to stay tuned and share this video. with anyone brave enough to continue this journey into the darkness. See you next time.